Hi, I'm John McGuire, founder and director of the Kinesiology Institute. Thank you for tuning into this video. And be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified when we post new content. And go to kinesiologyinstitute.com to learn more about applied kinesiology. Welcome to our class number 1 on structural kinesiology. I'm John McGuire, and it's such a privilege for me to share this information with you that I've been studying for over 35 years. I've been teaching this throughout the world in I think 15 countries now, and to have the honor of having you join me to learn this information to help transform others' lives as well as your own is quite a thrill. So I'd like to start with just giving you a little pointer or two on how to switch your brain on. These are great things to do before you're learning any information. So the first thing we're going to do is I want you to touch your navel and then rub the points right under the collarbone. These are called kidney 27, the end of the kidney meridian. And as you breathe deep, look around with your eyes. This helps switch on the brain. In fact, in educational kinesiology, they call them the brain buttons. Now, another thing we like to do is integrate the eyes. So we're using the whole brain with our visual cortex by going up in the midline, looking at your thumb, and follow the eyes on the thumbnail. Let's do the other hand now. Join along. Up in the midline and around. Up in the midline and around. And now both hands. As you breathe deeply. And by the way, if you haven't had any water lately, it's always good to drink water because water is a main fuel for the brain. Your brain takes 30% of the water that you drink, even though it's maybe 6% or less of your body weight. So what's really important is whenever you're under stress or when you're about to learn something is drink water. Okay, there's a few other things we'll do. One is to unroll the ears. This helps to have greater auditory input. As you pull up and around, breathing deeply, it helps your brain to process auditory information. So we did the eyes to switch them on, the ears to switch the ears on, and we have our electrical system too with the kidney 27s. That helps your right and left brain working together. So those are some key factors. And the last thing we're going to do is called cross crawl. Cross crawl is like when you're bringing your left knee and your right hand together. So you hit the opposite knee, and this is helping the body to fire both hemispheres of the brain. And that's again what we're doing is we're letting the body get trained to use whole brain learning. So that's again why we're going across the midline. In fact, learning problems are generally a challenge with crossing the midline. So these are great things for kids as well. But just wanted to give you that tune-up before we start because each time when we're doing a class, we'll do some of these things, but it's really helpful for you, even on your own when you're watching the replay, to switch your brain on before we start. And then keep sipping water throughout the process. And if you ever notice like you're getting tired when you're reading, do those kidney 27s while you hold the navel and looking back and forth. The process will really help your brain to process information. Okay, so now let's look at what we have coming up today in our class. This is what we're going to cover. First, we're going to learn about the early history of applied kinesiology. And the man that I studied with, George Goodhart, was the one that actually started AK, and he's the man that is the genius behind all of this. So we're going to see what are some of the things that he brought us in the way of awareness. Now, his first discovery was the origin insertion technique, so we're going to learn about that, and it's a valuable technique to use, particularly with athletes or people that have injured, strained a muscle. The next is neurolymphatics. This is your nuts and bolts primary way of activating energy flow. The next is the muscle-organ meridian relationship, which is what Goodhart discovered. So that's why when we're learning the muscles, we learn the organs associated with it and the meridians that they're connected to, because when you work on the reflexes, you help not only the muscle, but the organ and the energy flow of the meridian, which helps basically every cell in the body function better. Then we're going to learn two muscles today. First one being supraspinatus, associated with the central meridian and the brain, very good one to start with, and teres major, which is the governing meridian. So we're going to get into that. And then the last thing we're going to do is the injury recall technique, which could be the most important, powerful technique that you will do with people. So we like to start with that one first, and it's very simple. Now here's the man I studied with, Dr. George Goodhart, who was one of the most influential people in all of history, I believe, in healthcare because of his discoveries. And so he's a chiropractor, was a chiropractor from Detroit, Michigan, where I actually studied with him. And he observed that muscle testing was not only a diagnostic tool, but could also be utilized for therapeutic benefits. So he was the first one to understand that. And Goodhart used muscle testing to assess how the nervous system controls muscles. So you can think of muscle testing as really giving you three assessments. One, it tells you how's the nervous system doing. Another is you can use muscle testing to assess how the energy systems are doing, the acupuncture meridians. Another one of Goodhart's discoveries, that muscles are connected to acupuncture meridians. And then a third thing is it can check your psychological and emotional state to see if something's stressing you or not. Many other things can be done with muscle testing, but just keep those three in mind. We get the understanding of the nervous system and structural balance of the body, because certain muscles will be weak and then other opposing muscles will be too tight. So we're getting that what's going on in the nervous system. Is there energy flowing through the nervous system? Is there energy flowing through the meridian system? And then is there a psychological stressor that needs to be cleared? So Goodhart was the one that discovered this. Now he observed that muscle strength could be immediately shifted. In other words, a weak muscle could be instantly strengthened by the proper neurological reflexes or acupressure points or clearing stress. Amazing discovery that revolutionized healthcare. Because before, and still in the old school of physical therapy, they say, well, you got to exercise the muscle, it's weak. Well, that would be like saying if a dimmer switch was on a light, we say, well, we just got to put a new bulb in there. Or if there was a short circuit in the switch or the circuit breaker tripped, you know, it's all about, well, what about the bulb? Well, we know there are circuits we can switch on to allow that energy flow so the muscle goes to full power, which is particularly good in athletics. So many of my graduates and my programs, and myself included, and other people in kinesiology have worked with top athletes to create literally world records, as well as people getting their personal best, national records. And this system is so great for athletics. So we talked about the dimmer switch. We always want to find, if the muscle's not at full power, what switch will bring it up to full power. His realization was that the various forms of stress are what brings the muscle to a weakened state or inhibited. So we have mental and emotional, biochemical, physical, environmental, and electrical. All these things can play a part and they can inhibit the muscle. Now, this is a really important discovery that Goodhart discovered. He said muscles become tight because of opposing muscle weakness. See, in healthcare, what generally people will do is they will look at a tight muscle and they say, what do we need to do to strengthen that muscle? So the way you can think of it is, if I've got tight upper traps, they will go in and say, let's massage those. Like I get a massage every week, and I love when they go into my tight muscles, but I like to get balance too, because the reason these are tight is because of opposing muscle weakness. And that's the difference in our system. So do you understand the context of what we're doing here? what we're always looking for is where is energy blocked, those resistances where the dimmer switches are on. So we're going to learn how to test muscles throughout all the body, and the way we're going to begin is testing according to the meridians. Because like I said, every muscle relates to a meridian, and if a muscle is weak, it's saying there's energy blockage. So our goal is to restore energy flow throughout the entire body, and then the muscles will be switched on. We'll have postural balance. The meridians are flowing. We have the energy flowing to all the organs and all the systems in the body, so they're functioning at peak performance. And then the body can heal itself. And what's great about this is when your energy's flowing, you also feel best emotionally. I had one of my students who graduated from this program in the last round, and she said, you know, I never felt better than when we did the structural balancing, because everything, I had all these things out and got them corrected, and I feel so good as a result of that. So the work you're studying right now helps pretty much everybody. And again, we're looking for where's energy blockage, and we're switching it on. So that's the purpose of the muscle testing, as Goodhart brought it to us. Okay, so now let's go back and let's take a look at our next slide here. And we see Goodhart's original discoveries. This is the first one that he discovered. And I'll tell you how this occurred. He had he talked about this story when I studied with him. And he said he had this guy who was a delivery guy who would come to his office carrying boxes, I guess supplements and vitamins and that. And he said, Doc, my shoulder's really bothering me. When are you going to help me? Well, Goodhart had just gotten a book by Kendall and Kendall called Muscle Testing and Function. And he said, here, Bob, let me try something here. Why don't you stick your arm out, and I'm going to push on it and see what happens. So he took his arm out to the side, and he tested, and he found that it was weak on the shoulder side, that the shoulder was a problem. And he tested the other side, it was very strong. So I said, you have a weak muscle there. I wonder if that's related to your shoulder problem. So just out of more research, he palpated the origin and insertion of that muscle. That would be, in his case, it was the anterior serratus. Now on your picture here, it shows teres major, one of the muscles we're going to cover today. And the guy said, wow, Doc, that's really tender. And so Goodhart drilled as he would do, and he said these were exquisitely tender, which is often the case when you need the origin insertion work done. And he said, okay, let's try it again. So he put his arm up, and it was immediately strong. And Goodhart thought, wow, that's interesting. It was weak, and now it's strong just by rubbing the origin and insertion. And the guy said, wow, Doc, my shoulder feels great, thanks. So Goodhart thought, I'm on to something. And he said, I'm going to just test everyone that has a problem like in a joint or musculoskeletal issues. And I'll test, and if a muscle is weak, I'll rub the origin insertion. And he found that that often helped, but not always. So that led to his other discoveries. But this is the first discovery that Goodhart came up with, and he learned that it was an important one. Now, the origin of the muscle is where it attaches to a non-moving bone. So in the case of the teres major here, you see it's down at the near the bottom of the bone of the scapula here, and that's where it doesn't move. And then the moving bone is right here, which is the head of the, not the head, but it's the point in the upper part of the arm. You can find it yourself. If you reach back here, you feel this fleshy muscle. That's both the teres major and the lats. And they come and they insert right up on the inside edge of the humerus. So when it contracts, it brings it back. So non-moving bone, scapula, moving bone, upper arm. So it's pulling it back when it contracts, origin insertion getting close together. Now muscle tests are always going to be the line of drive where it goes far apart. Now Goodhart's next discovery was that there are points called neurolymphatic points that are neurological reflexes mainly along the spine and the back and in between the ribs and front. There's some out, as we see today, there's going to be some out on the chest wall here. And those are nerve endings that go back into the spine, and they trigger energy flow to the muscle and the related organ. So that was a discovery by Chapman, Frank Chapman, and he discovered these by working on patients in a hospital. He would notice, he would palpate all over and massage patients, and he found that everyone that had, say, lung problems would be tender here, and everyone with problems, say, with their brain would be tender up here, and people that would be, say, have stomach issues, they'd be tender under here. And he mapped out all these out from empirical studies, and he decided, you know, when I palpate that, after a few days, the tenderness goes away and their organ improves in function. And then they later did studies that showed there is a nerve that's going out from the spine where these points are triggered that go to the organ. And Goodhart discovered it also facilitates the related muscle. So that was Frank Chapman's discovery in the 20s and 30s. And they're mainly located on the torso, as you see, and the back. So those are what are often tender more in the front if the person has a problem. And the longer the energy has been blocked due to stress, that's what blocks these. It could be physical stress, emotional stress, as we mentioned, dietary, environmental stress, all these factors, including electromagnetic fields, they stress a circuit out, and like a circuit breaker, it goes boom, and then doesn't distribute energy. So that's what we're observing here, is that we can basically switch on a muscle and facilitate an organ by stimulating the right points. And the way we do that is we muscle test to find out where the energy is blocked. And that's a lot of what this course is going to be, is learning all the muscles, major muscles of the various parts of the body that will then facilitate energy flow to the muscle, to the organ, and the meridian. Okay, now he found that when he rubbed these, the tender areas of the patient, the signs of the disease would improve. So that's where Goodhart picked up that information from Chapman, and why this system works so great is it helps the body heal within. Now, we're not treating disease, we're not diagnosing disease, we're just finding where energy is blocked. When you unblock energy, the body can heal itself, and often symptoms go away naturally. However, if somebody's having prolonged symptoms, especially if they haven't had a checkup, it's always good for them to have a professional evaluation and assessment to see if there's anything more going on. But this is often a great thing to keep the person tuned up rather than waiting for them to fall apart and then try and help them. In fact, again, I've been doing this since I learned it on a regular basis, always tuning up myself as well as having other people tune me up through the kinesiology like you're learning, and it keeps me out of symptoms. Like, I've hardly ever had any pain for the last 35 years that I've been studying this. And if I do, I can usually get rid of it in an instant. So that's what, over trial and error of time, he observed where these points are. So they act like circuit breakers or switches to turn on the energy flow. And when the flow of the lymph slows down or gets congested, these points often become tender, and the greater the tenderness, the greater extent of the blockage. And then firmly rubbing these points in a circular motion with the pads of the fingers, or sometimes I'll do it in a line if it's along a line or in between the ribs, generally about 30 to 60 seconds, stimulates the lymph flow in the organ, and the associated muscles are improved. Okay, now we have the muscle-organ meridian relationship that Goodhart discovered, and that is where we talked about this, that every muscle in your body relates to an organ and a meridian. And there also have associated acupuncture points that when you sedate a point, like we learned this in the biochemical part of our course, that you could sedate like the stomach meridian, and then we call it putting it in circuit. It keeps that muscle weak, and the stomach meridian muscles will be weak, and then you can find out what nutrition strengthens them. So it's a very, very helpful principle to keep at the foundation. So that's why we're reviewing some of these things. We've covered them in previous courses like the fundamentals, but we want to make sure you're very grounded in the understanding and context of these principles, such as the organ-muscle meridian relationship, and the fact that energy blockage is what we're observing when a muscle is switched off. And when we can switch it on through these various energy switches, like the neurolymphatics, that then we have balance maintained and health restored. Now we're going to cover the supraspinatus muscle. If you do have the Touch for Health book, that's on page 98. And the central meridian is the meridian that is associated with this muscle. And it's on the midline, and it's going from the pubic bone just up to the lower lip, and it's associated with the brain. So that line right there is the way the meridian flows. The brain is the organ, and the action is it abducts. Abduction means pull away from the body, pulls away from the body, and it slightly flexes it, bringing it forward, and it stabilizes the shoulder in the joint. So it's when people have a shoulder separation, supraspinatus, along with other muscles, will be very weak. So that's its main job, is I'm going to hold that shoulder in the socket. Okay? That's called the glenoid cavity, the shoulder socket there. The origin is the supraspinous fossa, and I'll show this later on the skeleton, which is the ridge, which if you feel it right up here on the top of your scapula, and it goes under this bone called the acromion process and attaches back here to the head of the humerus. So therefore, when the muscle contracts, the origin and insertion get close together, and to test it, we push it in the line of drive like this. So it's slightly forward, and we're pushing it right back towards the groin. Okay, and I'll demonstrate that on Elena here in just a moment. So the greater tubercle of the humerus, that big bump, that's a greater tubercle, big bump on the head of the humerus, that's where it inserts. And the muscle test, as I showed you, and we'll demonstrate that in a moment. Now the neurolymphatics are on the outside of the upper chest. And again, if you have the Touch for Health book, that would be shown on page 99, but it's right here. And this also is shown in the fundamentals if you look at the brain reflexes, for you that have that manual and those PowerPoints. Now the neurovascular, in Touch for Health, they number them, and it's called point number 4, that's on the anterior fontanelle, and it's also point number 11, which is the frontal eminences, up there and there, and we'll demonstrate that on Elena. And then the indications, you see, are mental and emotional stress, learning difficulties, so children with learning problems will often have this muscle out, and then shoulder problems, and in severe cases, even a shoulder separation, as I mentioned. And it's the most commonly injured rotator cuff muscle. Rotator cuff being supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis, those 4 muscles. So people that have a rotator cuff problem definitely want to balance this muscle. And we've seen them when we do this, that it actually corrects the problem in many cases. People with shoulder problems say, wow, it feels better. So it's one of the key muscles that we want to balance. Okay, so Elena, come on up and let's see what we've got here. How are you doing today?
Great.
Excellent. Thanks for coming over. Now, have you ever had muscle testing done before?
Many years ago.
Many years ago, okay. Well, the thing to remember is when people are first getting muscle tested, it's not a strength test. It's a relaxed hold against my gentle, gradual increasing pressure. Okay. So I'm going to show you the line of drive. This muscle we're going to test is the supraspinatus. So she has the arm slightly in front, and I'm going towards the groin, and that's the line I'm going to push. Now you're going to hold and meet my pressure as I push. So I'll generally stabilize up here on her body. Doesn't have to be, but just enough so I'm not pushing her over, right? Okay, so meet my pressure and ready and hold as I push. And as I gradually increase my pressure, you see it's kind of spongy there, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's check the other side. Turn towards me, and so they can see how it's in front. So I now have the arm at this angle, and it's ideal to stabilize the opposite shoulder. I just was not wanting to block your view from the camera. Hold as I push this side. Ready, hold. Now, do you feel the difference?
Yes.
Okay, now this one again, stay right where you're at so I can show from this angle. Ready and hold. And that one's fading. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting is if she touches, you don't have to do this, but she can touch the energy switch called the neurolymphatic right here with the other hand. And I'm going to test again and see what happens. Ready and hold. Look how strong that is. Take the hand away, and hold again. See, that's called circuit locating. I'm locating the circuit that helps it. Now, there's also points called the vasculars we talked about. So touch right here with your other hand and hold as I push. And do you see that strengthened? Isn't that wild?
Yes.
It's amazing when people first feel that. Hold as I push, nothing there. Now touch the forehead again. She's got the vasculars, hold. And I'm pushing like twice or 3 times as hard and it can't budge it. Wow. So that's saying this is the energy switch that will activate that. Now, have you had any problems with the shoulder at all?
Yes, with this shoulder.
Oh, it's actually that shoulder, huh?
I think.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
But nothing like
Nothing major.
obvious, nothing major. Okay. And you don't have to have a symptom when a muscle's out, but now it could be circuits related to the brain. Have you been under any mental stress or?
Under a tremendous amount of stress.
Oh, well, there you go. See,
Yes.
so yeah, like we said in the indications, if someone's under a lot of mental stress or emotional stress, that muscle can get shorted out. So that's another factor. So stressors from all the different kinds of stressors can switch it off. So here's how we're going to switch it on then, is we rub this firmly, and the points in back, is that tender?
Yes.
Okay, you turn and face the camera, and you rub that spot. Now I'm going to rub the points in the back, which are at C1, so I'm on the top of the neck. It'll be right here, so you can see where I'm rubbing on her. Just under the skull, off to the side, I'm rubbing particularly the side that's weak. Now you can rub both sides, and then I'll touch lightly on the vasculars. You can do both at the same time if you like. And very good, and then I'll touch right up here. So now I've got all sets of vasculars. And it doesn't matter who does what. I could be doing it all, but is that tender in there at all? Mm-hmm. And generally again about 30 seconds. So let's see what happens now. After she's done that, let's test it again. Ready, and I'm going to push and hold. Wow. See, without, yeah, now we've got it switched on. So that's holding very well. Now, while you're up here, let's test the next muscle, and then I'll talk about it. It's called teres major. Teres major is by turning this way. The muscle, as we are going to see, is back here on the back of the scapula, back of the bottom. We showed it earlier in the origin insertion technique tip pictures. And the insertion is going to be right under here. So these 2 points come close together, which is what you're always doing. I'm bringing the elbow back as far as I can, and the line of drive is going out and forward, and she's going to do her best to hold. Now, stabilizing it in the standing position, I'm putting my hand in front, so I'm cupping her whole shoulder here, with my forearm, as you see, is right along her back, so she's not moving at all, and ready, and hold. And that one's looking real good. Okay, so let's do the other side here. You can stay right where you're at, and elbow back, ready, and hold. Now you notice whenever I'm muscle testing, ideally you want to be pushing or pulling right along your midline. And in this case, see, I'm standing here and I'm pushing the way I'm facing, and then this one I'm pushing here, the way I'm facing. Now turn around and face me again, and we'll do that supraspinatus facing me. So at this point, this is where we started, like the arm out here. Now in this case, I would be pushing along this way, but it's not that difficult to do. And she drops the arm about 15 degrees from the side, so that's the one I did here. But I also could do it like this, like when you were facing the camera. See, and then I'm pushing right along my midline like this. So those are general kind of, let's say, rules of thumb, pardon the pun, on muscle testing. Okay, that one was great on the other one, but the neurolymphatics would have been out here wide, so they're about 2.5 inches wide between the second and third rib space, so they're right out here, and then in the back, they would be right here at the second and third, between the second and third ribs, off in what's called the lamina groove, the space right along the spine about 1 inch out. Now the neurolymphatics for the muscle that we did have to work, the supraspinatus, I find the skull, I go right under that, and it's right up at the top of the neck, so you'd be rubbing it like that. So if you can zoom in, it's right here. Okay, so that's the spot. So you're off to the side of the neck. Very good. Okay, thank you, Elena. I'll bring you back up in a little bit, but you got the chance there to see how that works. So let's go back over now to, which we just did. Remember, mental and emotional stress is the #1 indication for supraspinatus. And so folks, who isn't under mental and emotional stress these days, right? So this is one I probably rub more than any other muscle. I love to work this muscle. So now let's take a look at our next set on the teres major, which we just demonstrated with Elena. And you see that the teres major is related to the governing meridian. So the first 2 muscles we're covering in this course are related to the midline meridians. I'll give a little more insight on those. See, the midline meridians, central and then governing, also known as conception vessel and governing vessel, are reservoir meridians. And all of the other meridians run on both sides of the body bilaterally, which we'll be getting into over the course of the next few weeks. We get into it much more in depth in our energy kinesiology certification program. But for now, we're still referring to them because it's related to everything we do. These reservoir meridians, any other meridian can pull from or kind of borrow from the reservoir if they need energy. So it's often good to balance these first. And that's where John Thie, man who I worked closely with, and I was the program director of his Touch for Health Foundation back in the 80s, and then I had the great privilege of working with him in his office as a chiropractic assistant. He would always balance the central and governing first. So he said that's a great strategy. Now, not all kinesiologists do this. And just by the way, there's many different forms of kinesiology. Just like there's many forms of cooking, there's many forms of psychology, there's many forms of all kinds of sciences, see? So there's a lot of different approaches. So it's not that one is the right way, which I made the mistake of when I first studied with Goodhart. I said, Goodhart's way is the right way, and I'd see people doing it differently, and I'd say, well, that's not right, that's not correct. But then I would see that it worked, and then I realized what John Thie talked about is we have a Touch for Health synthesis. And what Touch for Health is John Thie was one of the founders of the International College of Applied Kinesiology, one of the original doctors, along with Sheldon Deal and a few others, that worked with Goodhart right in the beginning to create a body of knowledge. And John Thie said, well, these are all great techniques, Dr. Goodhart, but why don't we have a book for lay people and people that are not doctors? And so John Thie said, let's write the book, because Goodhart wasn't going to write it, and he did. And then that's where it got out to the masses. So back to teres major. So we have this governing muscle, governing vessel muscle, that's on the back of the scapula, and it, again, what it does is it pulls the arm back in what's called extension. Extension is back like this, flexion is forward, and it brings the arm in. So it's a muscle you would use if you were doing a swimming stroke. And then you're contracting it. And let's take a look at what other factors we want to know about this muscle. The organ is actually the spine, not an organ, but that's the body part that it relates to. So if you have problems with needing a chiropractic adjustment, this muscle will often be weak. The action is it adducts, means brings in, and extends, as I said, brings back, and it also medially rotates the shoulder, or the arm in the shoulder, so that is bringing in like this. So that's why when you start with the hands in and you bring them back like this, you then you're going into extension, so you're pulling the elbows back and they're coming towards the side. That is adduction. So the line of drive is to go forward like that. It's not as commonly found weak as maybe the supraspinatus, but it can be found weak. And for you that are chiropractors, or someone maybe you would refer to a chiropractor, I found that often a chiropractic adjustment will strengthen this muscle. In fact, John Thie in his practice as a chiropractor, I didn't notice him ever testing the teres major, because he would always test to see where the person needed an adjustment, do the adjustment, and it would strengthen anyway. So that was interesting how I observed that. So there's that origin. It's on the bottom, which means the inferior means bottom angle, and the lower third of the lateral border of the scapula. So it's down around the bottom of the scapula. We'll show that on the skeleton a little bit. And the crest of the lesser tubercle of the humerus. And so that's that little ridge on the upper inside of the arm, the humerus. And you saw the muscle test, as we said there. Neurolymphatic, again, is this between the second and third ribs, about 2.5 inches out from the sternum, and between the second and third thoracics, again, in that lamina groove, about 1 inch from the spine. Now, the vasculars are up here. They're about 1 inch below what's called the pterion. That's where the frontal bone, the temporal bone, parietal bone, and sphenoid bone all come together, which is your temple. So it's just down from that, about 1 inch, and slightly above to the front of the ear. So you got your point right about there. That's point number 8 in Touch for Health book, which you can see those. I think it's around page 56 or 57. If you have a Touch for Health book, you can see all of them. Okay, and then your indications there again are that you have weakness on both sides or repeated weakness, as I mentioned. That would be the need for a chiropractic adjustment, and particularly in the thoracic area where the ribs are. And also difficulty placing hands behind the back. And you notice I had a client once that said that, I can't bring my arm back. Balanced the teres major, and it ended up working great. And that's something you'll notice is whenever someone says, I have difficulty with this movement, you're going to learn later in the course how to balance all the muscles in an area. Right now, we're going through them in meridian order, but we're going to end up going into let me just bring this up here for you. The next technique is we're going to do injury recall. And so we're coming up with 2 ways to slice the muscles. So again, what we're learning now is we're going to learn them in meridian order. So we did the first 2 meridians, central, governing. And then our next class, we cover them in the stomach meridian order. Then we go into spleen, and then we go to heart and small intestine. And it's good to know them in that order because we're going to be doing some balancing where we're going to check those head points, which we covered in the fundamentals. So if we see like somebody is weak on liver, we'll test all the liver muscles. Or if they're weak back here and it turns out that its spleen meridian is deficient, then we will check all those muscles. Just to review, this is, knock on wood, if a strong muscle goes weak when we touch here, that will indicate that muscles in the liver meridian or gallbladder are under energy or would be found weak. These are all priority points for under energy, like where under energy equals weak muscles. Then we go to fire element, then earth element, then we go to the metal element and water element. Central would be up here and governing would be back here. So it's a great way to do a quick screen, and when we do a full session, you're going to be doing that and marking it on your charts, which you've given you in your handouts or your email downloads. And those 2 charts, we have one according to anatomical organization and one according to meridian. So you can look at the body from both ways, but that's a meridian focus we're going to do now. Later in the course, we're actually going to be working on organizing, let's test all the muscles in the shoulder. So someone comes with a shoulder problem, you check all the muscles in the shoulder, balance any that are weak, and invariably they'll be much better. In fact, a quick story, there was a man who was one of the top professional baseball players who I listened on ESPN broadcast. They said, yeah, Vladimir Guerrero is out of the lineup due to muscle injuries. Well, later that day, I got a call from one of my graduates from this program. And he said, guess who I'm working on? I said, who's that? Vladimir Guerrero. Oh, I heard about him. He says, yeah. And I just tested him. He had all the muscles out in his left shoulder. I balanced them all, and he's doing much better. Well, a couple weeks later, maybe even just a few days later, he was back in the lineup, and he started hitting phenomenal home runs and long balls, and he was like called a slugger, right? And he ended up getting the Angels, who was playing for there, into the playoffs, and he scored the winning runs in the games both against Boston and the Yankees. They almost made it to the World Series, but had take more than one player, right? Well, the next year he helped his next team, he got traded to go to the World Series, and then he had a third season. Now, he was late in his career, and they thought maybe he's going to be washed up and he won't play anymore. But because he had the muscle balancing done by one of my graduates, he extended his career 3 years. Since the guy was making $15 million a year, that was a pretty good result of him getting balanced. So at that time, when Vladimir had such an improvement from one session, he wrote a check for I think it was at $3,000 or $6,000. I think it was $6,000 on the spot. And he told my graduate, Danny Varela, by the way, some of you might know him, he said, I want you to work with me for the rest of the season. So he gave him a retainer right then and there. So that was a great testimony to how when you switch on muscles, particularly with athletes, they can achieve great things. Okay, so let's go back to the next slide we talked about is the injury recall technique, which we'll be demonstrating on Elena here in a moment. And it was discovered by a podiatrist and later adapted to AK by Dr. Wally Schmidt. And I had the great fortune of studying not only with Goodhart for my certification, but Wally as well. Wally is right up there with the top kinesiologists in the world. And Wally was George Goodhart's next door neighbor when he was a kid. So Goodhart, when he was discovering all this, would use Wally as his guinea pig. And so Wally was so impressed, he went on to become a chiropractor and work in Goodhart's office and then teach with him. Now, muscles retain a memory of an injury even after the injury is healed. They have a neurological and feedback that this is injured. So now what happens then is the injury never heals until you erase the memory of that injury, which means you're susceptible to more injuries. Particularly good, again, with athletes, particularly football players or boxers that are getting like, I remember one of my students worked with Tomlinson, LaDainian Tomlinson, and he said on CNN, he said, every time I would go to a football game, it'd be like getting in 6 car accidents every game. Well, injury recall is great for people like that, but good for everybody, as you'll see. Now, it can also be a surgical incision, a tooth extraction, a skin or a burn, an injection of a needle, or a cesarean. So anyone that's had that, this is great for those things. And it's also useful for releasing stress from old injuries, increasing range of motion, head, neck, and spinal injuries, migraine headaches, sprained ankles, and after a root canal or a mammogram. And so if you don't clear the injury of the memory of the injury, the old injury, it will make you susceptible to future injuries in that area. Also fatigue, it fatigues the body to have to retain the memory of the injury, that muscle, so you don't have this high energy, and then it makes your body stiff. It leads to neurological disorganization and drains energy to the muscles in that area. So it's a major factor here. Now, every time a person's hurt, the body limits the range of motion to protect itself. So, you get an injury, it says, okay, we better not go so far, we better not go so far, and more over time we become stiffer, stiffer, stiffer. So after years of injuries, the major loss of flexibility can occur. The 3 most devastating injuries to the body neurologically are a root canal, a mammogram, and a sprained ankle. And this is because there's a lot of nerve endings in that area, particularly the root canal. There's so many in the mouth, which give feedback to the entire nervous system. And Goodhart also discovered that there was a neurological tooth relationship, that each tooth relates to different muscles that affect different organs. So teeth are really important. And here's what Wally said about this technique. He said, if you can clear out old muscle memories of injuries, it is the single most powerful thing you can do to help a patient. And that is his first thing. He says that's why we're teaching it in the first class. He says begin with this because you get so much bang for the buck. And it's a very simple technique that you'll see when we bring Elena up here. So Elena, why don't you come on back up and we'll see what you've got. So you mentioned you've had, in fact, why don't you lie on the table here, and you've had some, I think some things going on with your feet, yes. Correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. You also have, I believe, root canals, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's what you do. You first, you can take an indicator muscle, see that it's strong, and I'm just going to check to make sure when she brings her head back that it's strong, because if there was problems with her neck that made it weak, then that would be what's causing it to go weak. So here's what you do, is I touch an area. Now you said you had some heel issues?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm touching the heel and see what happens. Before she puts her head back, she's strong. Now put your head back, and it goes weak, and that indicates the need for this technique. So we're going to correct that in a bit, but let's see if there's any other areas. Did you, I think you said there was something over here with the big toe. Let's see if that shows up. And hold, and now back like that. So that one doesn't show. So we know this, the heel needs to be corrected. So let's, before we do that though, let's check her range of motion. What I'm going to do is you tell me when you feel a stretch, and I'm just going to bring the adductor out here and see how far we go. Pretty flexible here. Do you feel a stretch yet?
No.
Okay, tell me when.
Maybe now.
Now, okay, so we're a little less than 90 degrees, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to see if that improves after we do all these procedures, okay? So you can work the ankle or the neck. So I'll demonstrate the neck, because that's the one we like to start with. It's the easiest to learn. So what you're going to do is actually going to hold your heel where we touched it right there. So she's touching the area that tests for this. Do you know if you banged your heel at all or anything that might have happened?
No recollection.
No, yeah, but the fact is it's got a soreness there. So you relax the neck, and it's swollen, okay? So you relax the neck. I'm just going to do very gentle movement like this. So what I'm doing is I'm lifting her head and bringing it up into flexion. Just breathing deeply. And I'm basically bringing particularly the C1 flexed at the head. That's the main thing you're doing here. So about 6 or 8 times is fine. Okay, so now let's have you bring this back, and I'm touching the knee, so we're telling the brain, how's it going here? Well, it goes back into extension, and it's now strong. So that shows it's been cleared. So let's see, are there, you mentioned the root canals, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have her touch a tongue on a tooth that had a root canal. Now the tongue is also a way to circuit locate, which means touch and then test. So she's touching there, that's fine. Now go into extension and see what happens. Mm-hmm. Now have you had them on the other side too?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I want you to put your tongue on the left side now, and when you kind of bite down on the tongue, you're circuit locating that side, so hold there, and now back into extension, and that goes weak. Mm-hmm. So we're going to clear those. So again, what she does is she puts the tongue on the tooth or teeth. You could do multiple ones on that side. So kind of bite down on the tongue just gently so it's touching them. And then I just bring her back into neck flexion. Ready? And just relax. And, okay, now let's do the other side. So touching.
Am I supposed to touch it? I didn't
yeah.
touch it.
Oh, you didn't touch it?
Which, the right side?
With your tongue, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's do that again. Yeah, make sure your tongue is touching the teeth. And so breathing. And just relax your head. I'll do all the work for you. That's what you want him to say. Just let you do the work. And, okay, now let's go to the other side. So touch just the tongue to the other side. So it's getting upper and lowers. And breathing. And it's kind of a way of erasing it in the cerebellum. That's what it's accomplishing. Okay, so now let's have you take the tongue away for a second. And whenever I'm touching something like an area, I like to take it away and then touch again and then see what happens. Because it's like it lets the body know, oh yeah, we're not touching that anymore. Okay, now we're going to touch it. So in case it tuned it out, kind of like a ticking clock, you don't notice, it brings it back. Oh yeah, this is what we're testing. So now she's touching the right, okay, and head back. And if it goes strong, it shows it's clear. Now touching the left, and that's strong, that means it's good. Now have you had any other areas that you've had challenges? Even a muscle. It can even be a muscle that you've had challenges with.
I had a long time ago lower left hamstring torn.
Okay, left hamstring, okay. Mm-hmm. So I'll touch it for you. Okay, head back, We got another one. Okay, now this time I'm going to show, it's not in your notes, but I'm going to show the ankle. And it's very simple. She's going to touch the left hamstring back there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, it's the talus bone, that's the top ankle bone, right under the tibia and fibula. And I'm going to pull that down by just taking my fingers and going like this to push it down where the thumb will be on the bottom of the foot. So you can kind of see what I'm doing there. Ready? Yeah, and just keep touching the hamstring. And I really only need to do it like once or twice, but I did it 4 times. Here's another way you can do it, is I can put my thumbs on the top of the talus and just pull like a little jerk down like that. Sheldon Deal often does it that way. Wally does it like this. So that was the original discovery by the guy who did the podiatrist that figured this technique out. And what the way he described it is when you injure yourself, you tend to cringe like, oh, and you actually tighten and you go back into a extension of the neck. And your talus, where the foot is, it kind of comes in. So you're bringing it out, and it's an interesting, simple technique, but I've seen profound results with this. So now let's, take the hand away for a second, touch it again, and now head back, and there you go. So you can actually, you can test the head in extension. I also could have jammed the talus joint, but I don't generally like to do that, or jam the talus into the mortise joint. This is called the mortise joint here. So I'd be like pounding on the bottom of the foot. That's another way you can check it. In fact, I might demonstrate that. Any other areas that have had a challenge?
I had herniation of lower discs, lower back, and
Okay.
herniation of the upper spine.
Okay, let's start with the lower back. Touch that. And I'll test that. Now, by the way, if it goes weak when they just touch it, that could be that you need to do some correction on it, like balancing the muscles. But it also could be this, is if they touch it and then they go into flexion and it now goes strong, you could go ahead and do the injury recall. Because it's saying if I do what would correct it and that makes it strong, let's go ahead and correct it. But it was strong in the clear. So now she's going to go into extension and let's see what happens. Aha! So there we got another one. Now watch this. So again, without going into extension, that's strong. Now I'm going to tap the bottom here to jam the mortise joint and hold again and see it go weak. So it's either jam the mortise joint or put the neck in extension, and if it goes weak while she's touching the area, it says you need injury recall. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll just start with the foot. Is it on both sides, by the way?
I think so.
Yeah, so I'm going to do both feet. So while she's touching that area, I'm going to just do here, and then I'll do this one here. Okay, so again, what I'm doing is I'm pulling the talus out of the mortise joint, looks like that, while the thumbs are on the bottom of the foot. So that's simple technique. And let's do the head too. You can do both. It never hurts to do them both. So now I'm going to put you into flexion. And let's see now when, again, take the hand away for a second. Now touch there again. Head back into extension. And look at that. It's strong. Okay. So now we have the upper one you mentioned, right? And see, you could do this for a long time. In fact, that's the one student that said, wow, I felt so great after doing the structural. She said the main thing I remember, besides all the other stuff, was clearing out all these injuries, which we do in the hands-on classes, though I want you to practice this week and have people do it, work on you. You don't have to have an expert muscle tester come and test you. You just tell somebody how to push on your arm. In fact, I'll have you test me in a moment when we're done here. And then you can check if the flexion makes it strong. When you're going back, it goes weak. Then you know, okay, and you can do it. In fact, I did that the other day where I injured something, and I think it might have been my shoulder, and I just did like this. While I touched the shoulder, I did my own injury recall. And it was like, wow, feels great now. So it's a great little self-help technique. Okay, so touch the neck where you said you had some challenges. Okay, hold as I push. Now go into extension. Another one. So keep touching the neck, and I'll fix this one now. Okay, and relax. See how we're doing here. Okay, now let's take the hand again away for a second and back touch again and go into extension. And there we cleared another one. Now, we could go on, but you get the point. And again, next time we work together, we can go and find other ones, because a lot of times, here's what Wally does. He has a picture of an outline of the body, picture of the, drawing of the body, front and back. And he says, put an X wherever you had an injury. And then when the person comes in, he checks every area and sees if they need it. And most of the time, each area will need the injury recall technique. And it's a great way to clear some major neurological blockages. So let's see if we got any shift in your flexibility. Now before, you're a little less than 90 degrees, so tell me when you feel a stretch now. Okay, we're now past 90.
I can go more.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe not.
Wow. So she got basically, you got that much more.
It was easy.
Yeah, and can you feel the difference in how much?
Yeah, it was much
Yeah.
easier.
So there you go. So that shows you how just clearing this can give you phenomenal results in making you more flexible in that. Good work, eh? Okay, why don't you stand up and see how you're feeling, and then I'm going to have you test me, and we'll show you how easy it is, because you're brand new to muscle testing, even though I really had it before,
Like
other
20
than
years
20 years ago, when you were a toddler. Huh? Okay, so let's see. Let me touch this shoulder. First, just push on my arm gently.
This hard?
Yeah, just push down gently. Okay, ready? And push. Just make sure. Okay, you're pushing way too hard. So it's going to be about a quarter of that pressure. Just very light. Push. Great. And now I'm touching again. Push. Okay, that's good. Now I go into extension and push. Ah, see, there it go. So now I can touch here, and I'll just sit here and have you do it. And so you put your hand on my head, and I'll just let it drop, and you're going to go like that, okay? So, yeah, you just bring it back up. Pretty easy, huh? And I could have been doing that too. So let's see. I can't remember if that was the shoulder, because I mentioned I corrected something, but I can't remember what it was. Okay, now I'll go back in extension, and now it's strong. See, so you can have somebody else correct you. So we've got the supraspinatus. I'm going to review that muscle while we're here, and I'm pushing straight in like across 15 degrees in front, slightly out, and I'm going towards the groin. Ready and hold. And see, that's holding now. And then just so they can see it one more time, the point back here, this teres major muscle, I'm holding here and pushing like this. Now lie back on your back and let's test that on the table, both of those. So I'm going to show how these are done, and then we'll review the technique for the injury recall technique on the notes. Okay, so if you're on the table, supraspinatus, slightly forward, going across like this, and just out like 15 degrees or so, and you hold as I push. Great. And then this one here, ready and hold. And by the way, you don't have to walk around the table to test various muscles. Now, teres major, I usually test with them in a prone position, face down. But what we're going to do is have you bring the shoulder up and then elbow bent, hand down here. And I bring the shoulder up so I can get it, the elbow back as far as I can. Then I'm going to pull the elbow in this line of drive. First, let it go so they can see. That's the line of drive. And now hold for real. Ready and hold. And that would be the teres major on the table, so I could do it supine. But ideally, you'd roll over. So just for a moment, roll over facing this way here. And then she'd have the elbow bent and back as far as you can, and the line of drive would be like this, stabilizing the opposite shoulder blade. Okay? And so keeping this elbow back now, I stabilize the opposite shoulder blade, line of drive is like that. Ready and hold, and there you go. All right, so I think that's it for now. Tell us how you're feeling, actually. Sit up and give us a go on how that feels after we did some of those procedures.
I feel like I have more clarity in my mind, like actually,
Oh.
like lighter and more clear.
Yeah.
in the brain.
All right. And that was one of the things we did, remember, was the muscle related to the brain. And so, but the fact that we did a lot of injury recall technique on her as well, and the root canal. So keep us posted when I see you next how you're feeling after just this little bit.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And this was just a few minutes, but in a whole session, so much ground we can cover.
Amazing.
So you'll be getting more in the near future, okay?
Excited.
All right,
Thank you
great.
so much.
You're welcome. That's fabulous. So we got a few more things just to go over here. I'm going to get you back to the slides for the injury recall and review what we did here. So before testing, you notice that I brought her hip into a joint into abduction to measure her flexibility. Now, it could have been any joint, but that one's one that's easy to test because you see how far they go out, and then afterwards she looked like she got another 30 degrees of extension there. Now, we have the person CL an old injury and test a previously strong indicator muscle, and if it's test weak, the area needs further balancing before proceeding with injury recall. But remember, even if it does test weak in the clear, go into neck flexion, and if that goes strong, it's okay to go ahead and do that. Now, if it is strong, which it was in her case every time we tested, we put her neck into extension while she was continuing to touch the area, and that's when we found it went weak, meaning you need injury recall. Now, movement of the neck or ankle joint activates the mechanoreceptors in the brain. Well, it's actually in the neck particularly, and that receives stimuli from the person's touch of the area. So your neck has more mechanoreceptors, which means they're nerve cells that test its position. And you'll notice that the neck is so sensitive to touch. So that's why working the neck in that way has a profound way of clearing it. And the ankle also has so many of these receptors. So while the correction is they touch the area, or if it's hard to reach, like in the heel, I was touching it, but she could actually touch it, I think, in her case. But sometimes I'll touch the area. Ideal is if they touch it. So we tilt the head as far as it'll go, or at least where we're getting this joint here, the atlas on the neck, the head, that's where we're particularly wanting to move. So you can bring it up, but as long as that's moving, that's the key to the technique. So you repeat about 5 to 10 times, and then retest as the person CLs the old injury and hyperextends the neck, and it should now test strong. And then recheck the hip flexion, and you should notice an improvement. And this correction assists overall body flexibility. And again, as Dr. Wally Schmidt did, you can have people draw an X or circle in any areas on their body on a drawing where they may have had injuries, as well as ask about root canals, because in many cases that would be a primary thing to correct for people, as also mammograms. So they would just touch the breast tissue, and then if they go weak when they go into extension, that's where you're going to do the same correction as they touch that. So it's a very simple correction. Okay, let's see. We're going to come back, and I'm going to bring the skeleton up just for a little final review before we call it a day. And here is our skeleton showing origins are red, insertions are blue. So the actual supraspinatus is in this ridge here. You can see this is called the supraspinous fossa. There's the spine of the scapula here where it gets its name. Supra means above. So above the spine, supraspinatus is the muscle's name. And so there's like a shelf here where right in here is the origin. Now it goes through the acromion process, which is this little bone up here. So the muscle goes through, underneath and through that, and it inserts right out here on this greater tubercle, little bump there, and that's why it's holding that shoulder in the socket. That's its main job. Like, let's hold that in the socket. And it does slight bending forward. And the reason you don't bring the arm out too far, as we're going to learn later, the deltoid muscle brings the arm up like this, which is inserting down here in the deltoid tuberosity. So we don't want that deltoid muscle involved so much. We want just the supraspinatus working. And that's why each muscle test, you're bringing the origin insertion close together, and then the other muscles that are synergists that help it aren't working as much. So that's why we find a precise position and go in the precise line of drive that bring the origin insertion close together and move them towards far apart. Now we have another muscle we covered, and that would be, it's not really well pictured here, but the origin of the teres major is here, but it also goes down to here. It's actually all the way along here on the scapula. That's where it originates, and then it inserts up here in the upper inside of the arm, right in, it's one of these blue dots right here. So that right there. So that's where it brings the arm, as we see here, back in this position. So that's when the origin insertion are close together. And again, with a line of drive, skeleton doesn't quite move like the body I'd want, like I'd want it to, but it's going this way. We're pushing that elbow out like that, and that's bringing the origin insertion apart. So each time we're going to give you a few muscles, and the key you want to learn is, number one, where's the origin insertion? And I'll tell you why. Because if you know where the origin insertion is, then I bring them close together and I push them far apart, and I'll know every muscle test. There's a lot of muscle tests to learn. And first, it's kind of like dance moves. You got this movement here, this movement there, this movement there, this movement there. And they don't make sense unless you know the anatomy. And then as long as you know the anatomy, you can figure out the muscle test. You don't need to memorize them. So I like origin insertion. Of course, you want to know the name and its organ and meridian association. If you just take one a day and really study it, those are the first things you want to learn. Then you go into, now I want to start memorizing the indication. Like each one has an indication, like spinal issues, particularly thoracic, would be teres major. Mental emotional stress would be, and learning problems would be the supraspinatus. So when you start learning those indications, when you start listening to people as they come in, they say, I got this going on, I got that going on, I got that going on. You know, oh, that's supraspinatus muscle, that's the teres major muscle, and you know right what to check, and you can go right for that. In fact, you're going to learn postural signs for many of the muscles where you can look at their posture by the end of this course, and you know exactly what muscles are out on them. I love that. Goodhart said, if you listen to a person long enough, they'll tell you what's wrong with them and how to fix it. And that's where you're going to learn how to listen with ears that hear and see with eyes that see, and you'll be able to discern exactly what to do to bring a person back into balance. It's fantastic. So there's so much wealth of information here. The key is take a bite at a time. That's that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So just take one muscle like a day, and then I'm going to really learn that, and then I'm going to maybe next layer is to learn the neurolymphatics. This takes time, but here's a key on the neurolymphatic. The higher the organ is in the body, the higher the neurolymphatic point is. So the brain neurolymphatics up here. Then we get to, like, say, bladder, they're going to be down on the pubic bone. And, so the like stomach and liver are kind of in the middle. And then if you go below that, organs like small intestine will be lower, and then large intestine will be lower still. So you kind of have a somewhat of a proportional relationship where these points are. But again, if you just take one muscle a day and learn things about it, rather than try and learn everything at once, keep looking at the book, remembering learning is this: seeing, hearing, saying, and doing. That's where the practice comes in. If you do them on someone else and practice, then they do it on you and you say to them how to do it. That's where the learning really comes together. So find a partner. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody from the course, but we have people, if you haven't gotten paired up with somebody, at least you can have phone partners and even Skype with each other and look on the screen and see, hey, yeah, I'm doing the muscle here, and give each other feedback. But find a partner. It could be a neighbor, person you live with, spouse, child, and practice. Okay, so let's look at our assignment here. For what we're going to be doing, we have practice testing and balancing supraspinatus and teres major muscle on 3 people, as well as get your own muscles tested and balanced. If you have a massage table, practice them both standing, as we demonstrated, and on the table. Balance the muscles if found weak in the clear using neurolymphatic and origin insertion technique. So that means when I see finding the clear, you'll learn more later in the course where you do a challenge to the muscle, and that would be where you're touching a point, and then if it goes weak. But for now, it's just like I was doing it today. That was in the clear. Then do injury recall technique on 3 people and have someone perform that on you, and then review the PowerPoint slides and then take the quiz for this class. Now the quizzes are currently posted at the bottom of the video player, so when you just scroll to the bottom of the screen, you'll see the quizzes posted there. And then communicate with your study partner from the class at least once this week about the results and any breakthroughs you're getting, as well as insights. And if you need a partner, let us know and we'll pair you up with someone. And that's where I like to have a standing call. I have a guy that generally once a week we talk at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and we've been doing that for years, and it's made such a difference in my life and hopefully in his, because we say, here's what we're going to work on this week. Now he's not a kinesiologist, so we're doing it in terms of business, but it's really great to have somebody that you touch base with when you're particularly working on studying something, because it keeps you on track, keeps you focused, and it's what we call a committed listener. So you say, here's what I'm going to study this week. You tell me what you're going to study. And that's a great way to exchange with each other to stay focused. I recommend the same time each week. It doesn't have to be more than 10 or 15 minutes. If you like, you could talk longer, give as much time as you want, but it's great to have that touch point. Okay, so we will look forward to seeing you in the next week, same time, same place. And if you're watching these on the replay, remember you can pause them, or even if you're watching it live, you can come back and watch them on replay, pause them, practice something, rewind, watch it again. And the more you study, the more you review it, the better you'll get. Learning's a layering process, and you're not going to get this all overnight. But if you just keep coming back to it again and again and again, and practice, 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 you're going to be an expert that's going to be helping so many people. If questions arise, just send them to support@kinesiologyinstitute.com. Again, support@kinesiologyinstitute.com, and we'll answer them generally at the beginning of class for ones that came in, or at the end of class if it's during class that you have a question. So that way we'll get to you as quick as we can with an answer. And that's where you really learn, because you're going to start practicing this stuff and say, well, what if this happens? Or what do I do when that happens? And that's where I learned a lot. When I was studying in the beginning, I was fortunate. I had somebody, a doctor, that I was able to ask questions whenever they came up. So we'll be able to get you clarity as the issues arise. Okay, so until then, keep yourself balanced and have fun balancing others, because this is where you truly can make a difference in the lives of those you care about. And I've had many people say their lives were transformed through me doing this work with them, including in a few cases, people said I even saved their life. So I'm looking forward to hearing your great results, and we'll see you soon. All right, be well.